of wetlands in the state is done by the Department of Environmental Quality, and they basically regulate any wetland that's 5 acres or bigger. And the township decided a while back that we wanted to regulate even smaller wetlands down to 2 acres. So the township has its own wetland protection ordinance that protects wetlands very much like the state does, but just slightly smaller ones than the state would normally get interested in. So during the last legislative session, the state legislature changed some of their rules for how they regulate wetlands, basically trying to make it easier for people to do development.
That makes sense.
And our consultant suggested some ways that we could change our own ordinance in order to make it continue to match the changed state ordinances.
More fluid.
And then this commission got in the business of trying to figure out, well, is there other stuff we could mess with at the same time? And we got ourselves in a spot where we're now deciding we're just going to go with what the wetland consultant said, because she's the professional and we don't disagree with any of the changes she was proposing. The one thing that we did think we might do differently is somebody who's often works for people who try to get wetland use permits here in the township, a private consultant, suggested that the whole step of determining whether a particular wetland is essential or not is an extra step that the applicant has to go through, and then the township has to go through it, and then the board has to go through it. And you almost never find a wetland that's not essential.
Yeah.
Because the definition of what's essential is so long, and if a site meets any of them, then it's considered essential. So
you're saying, do you feel like those extra steps are crucial then?
We were feeling like those extra steps are a burden on applicants.
Because I was assuming that too. Okay.
We thought, let's be one of those groups that's trying to cut down on regulations instead of always trying to make it harder on people.
Right.
But what we learned is that the state won't let us do that.
Why is that?
Well, the way they look at it, we shouldn't be trying to regulate a wetland unless it's essential, right? So we have to prove that the wetland is essential in order to require a permit, right? But in principle, if I'm a farmer and I got a big puddle and I want to put some gravel in it so my tractor doesn't get stuck, I don't consider that a wetland because it's just a puddle on my farm. And if you're going to try to regulate me, you got to prove that that thing is an essential wetland, because for me it's just a mud puddle, right? So basically, there's a good reason why you would create this essentiality requirement.
Yeah. And I guess
but if around here where there aren't farms like that, somebody wants to do something in their backyard and they're going to dump a whole dump truck full of dirt in a wetland, well, we go to look at the wetland. Basically, if a duck landed there, that's duck habitat, and that's now a wetland. So what's going to fail?
That's a very good point.
It never fails. So we're trying to ease regulations, but we're kind of a small little case in a great big state that has that essentiality determination for a good reason, and we're not going to be allowed to undo it.
That's a very good. And I guess one of my last questions is, you briefly kind of talked about it. So what are some of the requirements for something, to be considered a wetland?
Well, basically, it has to sometimes have water on it, not all year, but sometimes. It has to have soils that show that there's oftentimes water on that site. They're called hydric soils. It has to have the kinds of plants that grow in places that are often wet. And then there's a whole series of other criteria that are used, but those are the basic ones. If there's sometimes water, if there's soil that looks like sometimes water, if there's plants that look like sometimes water, that's a wetland.
Perfect.